Every wolf in the great hall dropped the moment the doors opened. Not slowly, not with hesitation. 200 bodies fell to their knees in a single breath, heads bowed, spines curved. Goblets struck the table, conversations died mid-syllable. Even the fire in the central pit seemed to shrink, as though the flames themselves knew better than to burn too brightly in his presence. Kael Vorthane, Alpha King of the Ironmere territories, stood in the doorway and let the silence do its work. He never announced himself. His presence was enough, the weight of it pressing against every wolf's instincts like a hand around the throat. 3 centuries of rule had carved him into something more than a king and less than a man. His eyes, pale grey, the colour of a winter sky that had forgotten what blue looked like, swept the hall with the precision of a blade. Every head was down. Every head except one. In the far corner, near the servants' passage, where the stone floor was still dark with spilled wine from the evening's feast, a girl knelt. Not in deference, in labour. Her hands were raw and red, pressing a cloth against the flagstones in slow, grinding circles. Her hair, dark, tangled, half fallen from the strip of cloth meant to hold it, curtained her face. She had not looked up. She had not heard the doors. She had not felt 200 wolves drop around her, because she had already been on her knees long before any king walked into the room. Kael's wolf went still, not alert, not aggressive. Still, the way a predator goes still when it catches a scent it has been tracking for 1,000 miles without knowing it was searching. His beta, Draven, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the Northern Lords await your—" Kael raised one hand. Draven stopped, as though he had walked into a wall. The girl scrubbed. The cloth rasped against stone. She shifted her weight from one knee to the other, and a small sound escaped her. Not a complaint, just the involuntary exhale of a body that had been working too long without rest. Something behind Kael's ribs cracked. Not pain, not quite. A fissure in the frozen architecture of a chest that had not felt warmth since the night his first Luna bled out on these very stones. And the witch who killed her whispered the words that sealed him in ice. He had not felt anything in 300 years. He felt this. "Who is she?" His voice came out lower than he intended, rougher. The kind of voice that made lesser wolves bare their throats without being asked. Draven followed his gaze and frowned. "The Omega? That is Sarah. She is nothing, Your Majesty. A debt payment. Her father owed Lord Harath for grain stores and offered her in settlement. She scrubs floors, washes linens. She is nobody." Kael watched her hands move. The knuckles were split. The skin was chapped raw from lye water, and still she worked, steady, unhurried, as though the only thing in the world that mattered was making this one patch of stone clean. "Bring her to me." Draven's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Your Majesty." "Did I stutter, Draven?" The beta moved. 2 guards crossed the hall, their boots loud against the silence. When they reached the girl, Sarah, one of them gripped her arm and hauled her upright. She gasped. The cloth fell from her fingers, and for the first time, she looked up. The hall was on its knees. Every wolf she had ever served, every noble who had kicked her bucket or spat on her work or pretended she was furniture, all of them were bowed, foreheads nearly touching the stone she had just been cleaning. And at the far end of the room, standing in the doorway like something carved from winter itself, a man with frost-grey eyes was staring at her as though she had just put a crack in the sky. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She did not know who he was. She had never been permitted in the Great Hall during court. She knew only what every Omega knew, that the Alpha King was a story told in whispers, a name that made even the cruelest lords go pale. She was looking at him now, and he was looking at her. "Let go of her arm," Kael said. The guard released her so fast his hand might have been burned. Cale crossed the hall. Every wolf he passed pressed lower, but he did not notice them. He had not noticed another living creature in this hall since the moment his gaze found her. He stopped 3 paces away, close enough that she could see the scar running from his left temple to his jaw, a pale ridge against skin that held no warmth. Close enough to feel the cold radiating off him in waves, an unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the season and everything to do with whatever was eating him alive from the inside. She should have bowed. She should have dropped to her knees and begged forgiveness. Every rule she had ever been taught, every blow she had earned for failing to show deference, screamed at her to make herself small. Sarah lifted her chin instead. Not defiance, not quite. Something stranger. Something that looked like recognition from the outside and felt like falling from within. Cale's wolf surged. For the first time in 3 centuries, the beast inside him did not snarl or pace or press against its cage. It settled, as though it had finally found the thing it had been howling for every night since the curse fell. "You did not bow," he said. "I did not see you come in." Her voice was steady, raw at the edges, the voice of someone who had screamed and then learned not to, but steady. "I would have, if I had known." "Would you?" She met his eyes. No wolf of lower rank met an alpha's eyes. It was instinct, encoded in bone and blood. And this girl, this bruised, lie-burned Omega who slept on a straw pallet in the servants' corridor, looked directly into the eyes of the most powerful wolf alive, and did not flinch. "I do not know," she said honestly. Something shifted in the hall, a collective intake of breath, a ripple of disbelief that moved through 200 wolves like wind through tall grass. Cale almost smiled. He could not remember the last time his face had attempted the expression. The muscles felt foreign, like a language he had once spoken and long forgotten. "What is your name?" "Sarah." "Sarah." He said it once, quietly, and the word did something to the air between them, charged it, weighted it, made the cold radiating from his body flicker for just a moment, as though the ice had heard her name and did not know what to do with it. "You will no longer scrub floors." Lord Hareth, the man who had accepted her as debt payment, raised his head just enough to speak. "Your Majesty, the girl is bound in service to my house. By Pack law, the debt is mine." Cale did not look at him. "Name your price. Then remove yourself from my hall before I decide the price should have been your throat." Silence. Hareth lowered his head and did not speak again. Cale extended his hand to Sarah, not a command, not a summons, an open palm, offered the way one might offer warmth to someone who had forgotten what it felt like. She stared at it, at the scars across his knuckles, at the faint tremor in his fingers, barely visible, but there. The most powerful wolf in the realm, and his hand was shaking. She placed her raw, split-knuckled hand in his, and the frost on the window panes behind him, frost that had covered every window in the Ironmere fortress for 300 years, regardless of season, cracked. Just one pane, just a single fracture running through ice that had held since the curse was cast. Nobody noticed. Cale did. They gave her room in the East Tower, not the servants' quarters, a proper chamber with a bed frame and a fireplace and a window overlooking the forest. The frost on this window was thick as a fist. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her fingers to her sternum. Something hummed there, a low vibration she had never felt before, like a string pulled taut between her chest and somewhere else in this fortress. She did not know what it was. Omegas were not taught what a mate bond felt like. Omegas were taught to carry, to clean, to endure, and to be silent about all 3. A knock at the door. It was not Cale. It was an older woman with sharp eyes and flour-dusted hands, Marin, the head of the fortress kitchens, the closest thing the servants had to a protector. "He has not kept a woman in this tower in 300 years, Maren said without preamble. "The last one was his Luna, Elara." "What happened to her?" Maren's face tightened. "She died, the night the curse took hold. Some say it was a rival pack's witch. Some say it was someone closer." She paused. "Lord Fenwick, the king's chief advisor, was the one who found her body. He has served the king since that night, never left his side. Very loyal." The word loyal landed strangely, as though Maren had placed it on the table and was waiting to see if Sarah would pick it up and examine it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the last woman who slept in this room died in it, and I would rather you not be the second." Maren set a small bundle on the bed, bread, dried meat, a pot of salve for her hands. "He watches you, child. Not the way a man watches a servant, the way a wolf watches the only fire in a blizzard." She left. Sarah locked the door and applied the salve to her knuckles with shaking hands. 3 days passed. Cale did not summon her. He did not visit, but she felt him, felt the bond pulling tighter with every hour. She knew only that when she woke gasping in the night, the pull was strongest, and somewhere below, she could swear she heard a wolf pacing. On the 4th morning, she heard it, a sound like cracking timber, followed by a snarl that was not human. She followed it to the training yard. Cale stood at its center, shirtless despite the cold that followed him everywhere, his chest heaving. The ground around him was scorched with frost. Not the natural kind, but the curse kind, spreading in jagged patterns from his feet like a living thing. His hands were clawed. His eyes burned the pale, inhuman silver that meant the wolf was close to the surface. Lord Fenwick stood at the yard's edge, watching with an expression that might have been concern, or might have been something else entirely. "You need to control it," Fenwick said. "It is getting worse." "I am aware." Cale's voice was guttural, barely human. Sarah stepped into the yard. She did not decide to. Her body moved before her mind consented, drawn by the bond, by the pull, by the sight of him standing in a spreading circle of frost and fighting something she could not see. Cale's head turned. The silver in his eyes blazed, and then softened. Not to grey, to something in between. Something that had no name because it had not existed until she walked into his line of sight. "You should not be here," he said. "You are in pain." "I am always in pain." She stepped closer. The frost crunched beneath her thin shoes. Cold shot up through her soles, sharp and biting. But she did not stop. "How long?" 300 years. He said it flatly, the way one might state the distance between two mountains. "Since the night Elara was killed and the curse was set. I do not sleep. I do not feel warmth. Every year it spreads deeper. The ice is in my bones, in my blood. Eventually it will reach my heart and I will simply stop." "And nobody has broken it?" "Nobody can. The witch who cast it made certain." A pause. Something shifted in his expression, a hairline fracture in the wall he had built between himself and everything that could hurt him. "I was told it required something I no longer possessed. That it would take warmth freely given by someone with no reason to offer it. I stopped believing that was possible somewhere around the 2nd century." Sarah was close now, close enough to see the frost forming on his skin. Not on it, from within it, pushing outward like the curse was trying to claim every surface it could reach. Close enough to feel the cold pouring off him in waves that should have driven her back. She reached out and pressed her palm flat against his chest. Cale stopped breathing. The frost beneath her hand crackled, resisted, and then retreated. Just there, just where her skin met his. A circle of warmth, no larger than her hand, blooming against the frozen landscape of his body, like the first thaw after an endless winter. His eyes closed, his jaw clenched, and the sound that came from deep in his chest was not a snarl or a growl, but something far more devastating. A sound like grief releasing its grip on a throat that had held it for 3 centuries. "How?" he whispered. "How are you doing this?" "I do not know." Her voice was barely a breath. "I only know that it hurts me to see you cold." He opened his eyes, looked down at her hand on his chest, at the small circle of warmth spreading beneath her fingers, at this impossible, bruised, defiant woman who had walked barefoot onto frozen ground to touch a cursed king because his pain was something she could not stand to witness. "You should run," he said. "From me, from this place, from whatever this is between us. It will not end kindly." "I have survived unkindness my entire life." She did not remove her hand. "You are going to need a better argument than that. If you are loving this story, let me know by tapping that like button so I can keep bringing you more tales like this one." The following evening, Chaol summoned the court. Sarah stood beside Maren in the servants' alcove, watching as the Alpha King took his seat on the carved wolf throne. The hall was full. Lords, warriors, their mates and daughters, the entire political architecture of the Ironmere Pact. Lord Fenwick stood at the king's right hand, where he had stood for 300 years. His face was composed, pleasant, the face of a man who had made himself indispensable through patience and quiet service. But his eyes moved to the alcove where Sarah stood, and something in them sharpened. "The king's health deteriorates," Fenwick announced to the assembled court. "The curse advances. We must consider contingencies." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "It has come to my attention that an Omega, a debt servant, has been given quarters in the East Tower, the Luna's Tower." A murmur moved through the hall. "I mean no disrespect to our king's judgment, but in times of crisis we cannot afford sentiment. An Omega in the Luna's chambers is an insult to every bloodline in this room." Chaol sat motionless. The frost was visible on the armrests of his throne. Fenwick turned to face the court, and his voice carried the measured authority of a man who had rehearsed this moment. "I propose we send the girl back to Lord Hareth, and focus on seeking a true remedy for the king's affliction. Surely none would put one servant's comfort above the stability of the realm." Murmurs of agreement. Chaol still did not move. Sarah felt the bond pull tight, felt his anger through it, muted and controlled, a river of fury held behind a dam of ice. He was waiting, testing, seeing which wolves would reveal their loyalties. "Furthermore," Fenwick continued, "I have taken the liberty of sending word to the Ashenmore Pack. Their healer is said to possess knowledge of ancient curses. She will arrive within a fortnight." Chaol's eyes moved to Fenwick, slowly, the way a predator's eyes move to something that has just made the mistake of revealing itself. "You sent word to Ashenmore," Chaol said, "without my knowledge, without my command." The hall went silent. "For your benefit, Your Majesty. Only for—" "You do not act on my behalf without my word, Fenwick. You never have before. Why now?" Fenwick's smile did not waver, but his scent shifted. Something acrid beneath the composed surface. Sarah could smell it from across the hall, and she did not understand how, because Omegas could not scent emotions with that precision. Only bonded mates could. Only Lunas. That night, Sarah could not sleep. The pull in her chest was a drumbeat, urgent, insistent. She paced until the walls felt like a cage, and then she did something she had been told never to do. She went to the king's chambers. The guards let her pass. Perhaps they had felt it too, the bond between their king and this woman pulling the air taut like a bowstring. Chaol stood at the window, One hand braced against the frost-covered stone. The ice on his skin was visible in moonlight, tracing his veins, climbing his throat, a map of the curse's slow consumption. "You are dying," she said from the doorway. "I have been dying for 300 years. I have simply been slow about it." "Then stop being slow and tell me the truth. All of it." He turned. In the moonlight, his face was devastating. Not beautiful, not soft, but carved by suffering into something that made her chest ache. The scar on his jaw, the frost at his temples, the eyes that held 3 centuries of cold and, beneath that, the ghost of a man who had once known how to laugh. "The curse was not cast by an enemy," he said. "It was cast by someone inside these walls. Someone who stood beside me the night Elara died and whispered the incantation while I held her body. I did not know it then. I have not been able to prove it since." "Fennec." Cale's expression fractured, a flash of something raw crossing his face before the mask rebuilt itself. "You are smarter than they give you credit for." "I am smarter than anyone has ever given me credit for." She stepped into the room. "Marin told me he found Elara's body. He has controlled access to you for 3 centuries. He stands at your right hand and decides who approaches and who is turned away. And tonight he moved against me publicly, not because I am an Omega in the wrong room, but because the frost cracked when I touched you, and that terrifies him. The silence that followed was the kind that reshapes a room." "If he cast the curse," Cale said slowly, "then he has been sustaining it, feeding it. 300 years of faithful service, all of it a cage built from the inside." "Then let me break it." "You do not know what that would cost you." "I know what it costs you every single day." She crossed the remaining distance between them. "I know that the ice is in your heart and you have been alone with it for longer than most bloodlines survive. I know that you are afraid, not of the curse, but of the possibility that I might not be enough to break it. That you will hope, and the hope will be one more thing the cold takes from you." His hand caught her wrist. Not rough, not gentle. The grip of a man standing at the edge of a cliff and finding, unexpectedly, something to hold. "If Fennec learns what you are to me..." "He already knows." She placed her free hand against his jaw, and the frost beneath her fingers retreated like a tide. "He has known since the moment you crossed that hole for me. That is why he is moving now. He is afraid of what I am." "And what are you?" She almost smiled. "I am the girl who scrubs floors. And I am not leaving." Fennec struck 2 days later. Not with words this time. Sarah was descending the East Tower stairs when she felt it. A wrongness in the air, a wave of cold that was not Cale's. The stairwell temperature plummeted. Frost exploded across the walls in patterns she recognized from the training yard. The curse's patterns, but directed, weaponized. She could not move. The cold locked her muscles, drove into her joints, pressed against her chest like a hand made of ice. On the landing below, Lord Fennec stood with one palm raised, his eyes black, fully black, the whites swallowed by something ancient and hungry. 300 years, he said calmly. I maintained the curse, siphoned his power, kept him frozen and compliant while I ruled through his shadow. And you nameless, rankless nothing, undid more in a single touch than every healer I turned away from these gates. He closed his fist. The cold tightened. Sarah's vision blurred. He will mourn you, briefly. Then the ice will finish its work, and I will be what I have always been, the true power behind the Ironmere throne. Sarah's knees buckled. The frost was climbing her skin, burning where it touched, and she understood. This was how Elara had died. Not a blade, not poison. This consuming cold, directed by the man everyone trusted. But Sarah was not Elara. She did not know what she was, not yet, not fully, but she knew what she felt. The bond in her chest was screaming, a white-hot wire connecting her to Cale, and she seized it with everything she had. Not reaching for power, reaching for him. Heat bloomed in her sternum. Not a flame, a tide. Warmth that started at the bond and radiated outward through her veins, her muscles, her skin, meeting the curse's cold and pushing back. The frost on her arms crackled, steamed, began to melt. Fennec's eyes widened. That is not possible. You are nothing. You are an omega. You cannot. I am his mate. The words came from somewhere deeper than her throat, and when she spoke them, the warmth surged, through the stairwell, through the walls, through 3 centuries of ice that had held this fortress in a grip of frozen silence. And you are finished. The blast of warmth knocked Fennec backward. He hit the wall and crumpled, the black draining from his eyes, the stolen power ripping away from him like a cloak torn by a storm. But above them, in his chambers, Cale screamed. The curse, severed from its keeper, did not die. It convulsed. It contracted around Cale's heart like a fist of ancient ice, making one final, desperate attempt to claim what it had been promised 3 centuries ago. Sarah ran. She found him on the floor of his chambers, frost erupting from his chest in crystalline spikes, his body arching, his wolf half emerged, claws, teeth, eyes blazing silver, the shift caught between forms as the curse tore at him from within. She dropped to her knees beside him and pressed both hands to his chest. The cold hit her like a wall. Not cold, oblivion. The absence of everything warm, everything living, everything that made existence bearable. It poured through her palms and up her arms, and she felt it trying to freeze her from the inside out, felt the ice reaching for her heart the way it had reached for his, patient and absolute and certain of its victory. She did not let go. The frost climbed to her elbows, her wrists turned white. Her fingers screamed with a pain that went beyond physical. The pain of 300 years of loneliness channeled through a single point of contact. She thought of him crossing a hall full of kneeling wolves to reach the one woman who had not bowed. She thought of his hand trembling when he offered it. She thought of the sound he made when she touched his chest. Not pain, not relief, but the sound of a man remembering what it felt like to be warm. She pushed. Not with power, with warmth. With every moment of heat she had ever been denied, every cold floor she had scrubbed, every night she had shivered on a straw pallet and wondered if morning would bother to come. She poured it all through her hands and into his frozen chest, and she did not stop even when the ice reached her shoulders, even when her vision went white, even when her body screamed at her to let go. The curse shattered. It broke like a lake of ice, struck by something it was never built to withstand. A splintering, thunderous release that sent frost exploding from every window in the fortress. Glass shattered, stone cracked, and in every corridor, wolves lifted their heads as the temperature began to rise. In the king's chambers, Cale gasped. Air filled his lungs. Warm air, real air, not the frozen half-breath he had been subsisting on for 300 years. Color flooded his face. The scar on his jaw flushed pink with blood that was finally, impossibly warm. He looked at Sarah. She was on her knees, her hands still pressed to his chest, frost melting from her arms in rivulets that pooled on the stone floor like tears. Her face was pale, her body trembled, but her eyes were open, and they were looking at him with an expression that held no pity, no triumph, no expectation. Just warmth. "You impossible woman," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. Broke open. The way a dam breaks, everything held back for 3 centuries rushing forward at once. He pulled her against him, not gently, not carefully, the way a drowning man seizes the surface. She pressed her face into his neck and felt his pulse, strong, warm, alive. Felt his arms around her, no longer radiating cold but heat, the heat of a body that had remembered what it meant to be alive. "I feel you," he said into her hair. "I feel everything. I had forgotten how much it all—" He could not finish. He did not need to. She held him tighter, and the wolf inside him did not pace, did not howl, did not strain against its cage. It settled. Finally. Completely. It was home. They found Fennec in the stairwell, powerless and aged, the stolen centuries catching up to him in minutes, turning him brittle and hollow. The guards carried him to the dungeons. He did not resist. There was nothing left in him to resist with. The trial was held 3 days later. Cale stood before the full court, colour in his face, warmth in his skin, his eyes no longer dead grey but the blue-grey of a thawing river. Fennec confessed, not out of remorse, out of hollow resignation. He had cast the curse. He had sustained it. He had turned away every healer, every remedy that might have freed Cale, because a frozen king was a controllable king. The court was silent when Cale spoke. "You took 300 years from me," he said. "You killed my Luna. You kept me caged in ice while you ruled in my shadow." He looked at Sarah, standing with Maren at the edge of the court. "And when warmth finally found me, you tried to kill her too." He turned back. "You will not be executed. You will live, in a cell, in the cold you loved so much, and you will know, every day, that the woman you called nothing is the reason I am standing here free." 3 months later, the gardens of Ironmere bloomed for the first time in 3 centuries. Not the tentative bloom of early spring, a riot of colour, as though the earth itself had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. Flowers pushed through soil that had been frozen since before anyone could remember. The great hall's fire pit burned warm and gold, no longer fighting the cold, but simply burning, the way fires are meant to. Cale stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens, his hand resting on warm stone. He still marveled at it. The warmth of things, the sun on his face, the breeze that carried the smell of growing things instead of ice. Sarah stepped onto the balcony beside him. She wore the silver circlet of the Luna, placed on her head by his own hands before the full court, in a ceremony that had left half the wolves in tears. An Omega-made Luna, a debt servant crowned queen. He pulled her close, pressed his lips to her temple, felt the bond between them, warm and steady and alive, a constant hum beneath his ribs where the ice used to be. "A letter came," Sarah said. "From Lord Hareth." "The man who bought you for grain dirt?" "The very one. He writes to congratulate the new Luna of Ironmere and to express his deepest regret for any, and I quote, unfortunate misunderstandings during my time in his household." A pause. "He also requests favourable consideration for a trade agreement." Cale laughed. The sound startled them both, full and warm and real, echoing off the stone walls and out into the gardens where wolves paused and looked up, because they had never heard their king laugh before. "What would you like me to do with his letter?" Sarah leaned into his chest and felt his heartbeat, strong, warm, steady. The heartbeat of a man who had come back from 3 centuries of cold because a girl on her knees had looked up at the wrong moment. Or the right one. "Burn it," she said, "and send him a trade agreement so generous it will haunt him with guilt for the rest of his natural life." Cale kissed the top of her head. "My Luna is vicious." "Your Luna scrubbed his floors for 2 years. She has earned the right." Below them, the gardens bloomed. The frost was gone, And somewhere in the dungeons, a hollow old man sat in a cold cell and listened to the sound of a kingdom thawing without him. Above it all, the east tower window, the one that had cracked the night Cale first took Sarah's hand, stood clear and bright. No frost, no ice, just glass, and through it, the endless sky. So, where are you listening from tonight? Tell me in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, or if you felt that moment when the frost finally broke, share your thoughts below. I read every single one. And if you are not subscribed yet, come join the pack. I will see you in the next one.